Our team on stage is Matthew Morton from the Home Depot, Saif Rivers from IBM, Dave Marmour from Unilever, and Davitt from DHL. Please welcome them to the stage.
Matt, you want to go through introductions?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Matt Morton. I'm the Senior Manager of Supply Chain Strategy for Home Depot. My team really looks at where kind of the supply chain is going out over the next 5 to 10 years, how to plan for different changes, and we also lead the kind of management around machine learning and AI initiatives for the supply chain.
So I'm Saif Rivers. I'm with IBM Global Business Services, the consulting side of IBM. I have a practice that covers North America that essentially helps our clients figure out who they're going to be in supply chain and how they're going to get there. Some of that is, blocking and tackling the general day-to-day of supply chain. Some of it is really much further looking, bringing in AI, ML, and other advanced analytics into essentially helping optimize their business.
I'm Dave Marmour. I'm a supply chain data scientist for Unilever, and my job essentially figure out how to optimize their supply chain, get things from point A to point B quicker, faster, and cheaper.
Hi, everybody. I'm Davitt. I'm with DHL. I'm head of bid management for the Americas. I've had a few conversations, just want to clear what that means. My team is responsible for responding to large bids, RFQs for a number of your companies. So we make sure that we come in, deal with the pricing, deal with the solution management, and a lot of times that can be how do we integrate in AI into the supply chain to better increase the flow of goods through the system. So when I kick it off, just everyone's been talking about demand optimization, demand creation. Well, the next phase of that is once you've created the demand, you need to make sure that you actually are ready to move the goods through your network and actually get them to the customer. Because the last thing you want to do is create that demand and have the product not actually be able to arrive in time. So to start this off, we are going to be talking about the movement of goods throughout the supply chain, and then towards the end talk about a little bit more of the customer touch points. But one thing that we all discussed was managing the hype versus the reality in a lot of current companies around supply chain. So, Matt, if you want to jump on into it.
Yeah, so the hype, definitely the hype is something we deal with a lot at Home Depot. Kind of the biggest thing that we've had to do is really focus on what is actually achievable, where are the actual touch points where we can make a difference using supply chain and AI. And really, it's not necessarily about what we're delivering today, but about how we can set up the thinking across the supply chain, across the different decision makers to set it up for tomorrow. And so when we're going out there doing our day-to-day analytics, doing our day-to-day process improvement, thinking about how we would do that in the future to be able to enable some sort of machine learning or AI or automation system, that has been really a key part of what we've been doing, at least in the last year.
And a lot of my clients have what I term, bright, shiny object syndrome. They hear this fantastic use case, they think, let's go and push to completely change our business process, and it's a case of, well, slow down, let's look at what we can achieve today, let's look at how we get you there, and drive a roadmap to transformation. You're not going to get there overnight. And a lot of that comes with a perspective that says how much change is actually manageable in your business. What can your business really adapt to today? Because putting in the tool itself won't necessarily change anything, but it's how do your people work differently? How do you take cost out? How do you increase your performance to really execute? So I think that's often a danger we walk when we're working with client base, but it's an exciting place to be as well.
I would say that at Unilever, with the data science team within supply chain, we started about a year and a half ago. And what we have found is that the approach we took was we wanted to get some quick wins with the business to try and kind of earn some legitimacy with them. And what we found, unfortunately, we went to the business and said, hey, what are the problems you want solved, that you think we can help with? And what we found a lot is it's not necessarily a machine learning project so much as it's a data engineering project. They want to get data from here, and bring it all together, transform that data and put it in one, shiny dashboard or, some sort of file that we can send to them off. And so these were kind of, the projects originally that we're thinking, okay, this is not quite what we want to do, but this is kind of what the business asked for, and we wanted to kind of get in with them. So initially, that's kind of at Unilever how, in the supply chain, we started as our data science team, more as an engineering team. And now as we've started to earn some some favor with the business, we've started now to expand into machine learning and expand from there.
Cool. One thing I didn't mention earlier, if anyone has any questions throughout the entire panel, please feel free. Just because I know sometimes when I was sitting listening to some, there was something I kind of wanted to ask, and then towards the end, it either wasn't relevant. So please raise your hand if there's something you want us to expand on. We're trying to keep this kind of more an open dialogue. So just sticking with the same topic of hype versus reality. Hype can be a good thing. Sometimes you need that hype to get top executives excited and wanting to go forward with some of this investment. Maybe, Saif, could you maybe talk about how are you managing kind of the realistic expectations when you go in?
So it's a really good point. I think you need some evangelizing because ultimately it helps everyone buy into a common goal, a common approach. But then how you, I suppose, manage the program at an operational level is often a different topic. And I'll liken this to a program we have going on the West Coast at the moment with a large grocery business, where they're really looking at changing their demand forecasting approach, and they're looking at using a different set of equations first and foremost, but then getting into large data analysis, looking at demand driven by weather, demand driven by local events, demand driven by socio-political issues, all kinds of things, which I think is really important for their business. So what we've done, we've set out this overarching vision, and then we've said, here's your multi-stage journey to get you there. It is about how you make this, obviously, a commercially viable position, because I think we all know you can go and spend tens, if maybe not hundreds of millions of dollars trying to make this happen. But if you're not seeing any return, it becomes a very difficult position to find yourself in. So we've tried to make this self-sustaining, as I said, more bite-sized rather than broad-scale transformation, but with a roadmap of events that does drive them towards where they want to be. I think we've seen that sort of approach work in several clients today that really recognize they've got an established model that works for them. They're not maybe a brand new entrant on the block, and they've got to work within the confines of their business. So judging how to create a program like that is actually half the battle.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, so at Home Depot, the leadership has actually been really excited about machine learning and AI initiatives. And so it's been fairly easy to get buy-in at that level. Where you kind of run into some roadblocks, in my experience, has been you've got the people closer to the operation, the people actually making the day-to-day decisions. And when they hear MLAI, they kind of roll their eyes and they say, this is a hammer looking for a nail. It's not applicable in my area. And so, a lot of the challenge that we have to work through is proving and demonstrating value and really demonstrating a collaborative nature with them in order to get buy-in a little bit at a time that these types of solutions can work for them.
Just keeping on that same trend. So there are a lot of companies that say that they're interested in it. We talked about that a minute ago. Do you find that the leadership at the top truly understands what AI can do? And how are you, managing that as far as making sure they understand the capabilities and the potential ROI that can be generated from it?
I think they do. I think they come to conferences like this and they see what some of our competitors are doing and say, wow, to stay competitive, we do need to invest in this. I think it's kind of more of a how. How do you invest in this? How much money does it really cost? Where do you develop that talent pipeline? Here at Unilever, we've actually had a little bit of a struggle hiring data scientists to join our team, people that want to work. Our supply chain headquarters are out in Shelton, Connecticut. Finding people that want to work out there, for instance, not the easiest thing to do. So what we've done, we've actually gone to the consultant route a little bit. We've moved our resources towards hiring in, bringing in consultants to assist with the data science team. So our team is partial internal data science, partial external data scientists, and working with them to kind of develop first a roadmap and then to attack that roadmap. And we've been with them now for a couple of years, and the plan was we want to bring this team internally, but it's been a struggle figuring out exactly how to make that happen.
Mass, what do you think is the difficulty in the recruiting? Is it because of the work they're doing, or is it location? What's some of the problems you're having recruiting people for supply chain AI?
Sorry. I think it's I don't necessarily know why it's so difficult. I don't know if supply chain is necessarily the first route. When someone decides to become a data scientist, I don't know if supply chain is kind of the sexy career choice to go into necessarily. But it's one of the things. Maybe we're not trying hard enough to hire the right talent, or maybe we're just not looking in the right places. I think developing. It starts, it's a combination of HR, but it's also kind of, showing up to these types of conferences and meeting the right people. I don't know if we've been doing enough networking in that regard necessarily, but it's been a little bit of a struggle, but I think hopefully we'll get through it eventually.
Anyone else want to jump in?
I think Dave's actually on to a point, but I think what I'm seeing is we're really in a zero workforce economy. I mean, we've got the highest level of employment that I think has been had for however many decades. Trying to find good resource in the market is exceptionally hard. I'm probably paying between 10 and 15%, maybe nudging 20% premium on salaries I was paying a year ago. I mean, it's moved really, really quickly. So to try and find credible people who have the skills that we need, that are executing for our clients, is a real battle right now.
Yeah, we kind of have a hybrid approach to that problem. So definitely if you're hiring straight off the street, it's a real battle. It really just underscores the need to be able to grow this type of talent internally. We have a large centralized analytics function within Home Depot. So there's a lot of people who are very interested in analytics and are working around analytics that get to know the business really well in the area that they're in, which helps out a lot if you find a handful of people who are also very interested in machine learning and AI to be able to grow them into a data scientist from an analyst, and they also happen to know the business really well. It's been a great thing for us.
And that's actually a good point. I think if you can invest in your own people, you can help mature their capability. You can set essentially a career path for them over the next 5 or 10 years, and that's helping us, I think, all attract people, retain people. And again, going back to this concept of being a zero potential workforce, I think that's a really important thing right now.
So I'm actually come back to you, Saif, for this question. So a lot of companies now are realizing they need to invest in AI. And what do you feel? And I'm asking you this, so I won't put them on the spot for their company specifically. What do you find as a consultant that's driving most of the investment? Is it a push inside the company, or is it trying to stay competitive with customers such as Amazon that are already driving a lot of this?
Yeah. I suppose it's probably a striated answer. There isn't one single thing. There's operational pressures, the demand to keep up with the competition on the street, as you say, the Amazons and others, the Walmarts of the world that are all driving really hard and are investing huge amounts of money and time into this. There's their internal pressures as well. You have the board breathing down your neck saying, why haven't you achieved the latest targets that you set out to get to? How are you going to do more? How are you going to essentially accelerate your workforce, but without really any potential to grow your workforce? So how do you use automation, AI, other capability to do that? But then there's also, I suppose, the expectation from the customers. Never before, and I come out of retail, so I have a bit of a background in this, but never before have customers wanted more from us as retailers, as CPG companies, as people that offer something to an end user. The expectation is so high these days. You can't fail. You're not allowed to. So a lot of my customers are saying we are being squeezed from all angles. We have to find a mechanism that allows us to fundamentally transform our business, but once again in a manageable way. How do we do that using technology? What can we do that changes our operations, changes our approach to the market, and changes our message? And some of the clients are really finding phenomenal results. There was one announcement yesterday. I won't name the client, but they're a large quick service restaurant, and they talked about a 30% increase in terms of one of their product lines. I mean, wild. Try and do that in quick service. Never heard of. So there are some great use cases out there.
Anyone else want to jump in, or just same question? Fair enough. So two differences so we have Home Depot and we have Unilever here. So there are a lot of differences between the type of supply chain needs that you have. Home Depot is a retail company and then brings in a lot of their goods from companies and vendors where you're producing a lot. Maybe would you like each to kind of touch on some of the differences between how you attack the supply chain issues? So if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, from Home Depot's perspective, they have to, I don't know how much of an online presence they have, but, a lot of it's getting your shipments, obviously, and then selling them from the stores, moving from the DC to the store, whereas ours is just a little bit longer. We have the raw materials need to get to our factories, from our factories to the DC, from the DC, then off to the customer. And so there is, we sometimes do get focused on thinking of logistics as, okay, we're moving it from our DC out to the customer, and I think a lot of the business focuses on just that aspect, just the secondary logistics right there, and they're not thinking about the primary, bringing in that those raw materials to the factory, which is probably just as important as anything, and so I think there is a bit of a difference there. Yeah.
Matt from Home Depot side?
Yeah, it's a little bit different, but we're still, Home Depot over the last 10 to 15 years has made a big push to take over transportation from our vendors, and so we're really in charge of the ordering, the transportation, how all of that is happening. And so, there's a ton of opportunity within that to how the decisions that you're making around time of order, the information you learn while a product is en route to your distribution centers, what you do with it when it's at the distribution center, and then ultimately to the stores. At the same time, we are hugely expanding our customer delivery capabilities over the next 5 years. And so how we integrate those capabilities in those new DCs that we're building out to be able to enable same and next day delivery to our customer while also keeping service to our stores, and the decisions you make, the combined end-to-end decisions that you have to make with both of those ends in mind is definitely where a lot of our complexities come into play.
Do you run into any problems when you are not controlling the full flow of goods because you're dealing with a lot of vendors getting data? And how do you end up getting, or do you have any siloed information or data that you can't get to make the predictions you need?
I mean, I spend a good 80% of my day, I think, trying to figure out where the data sits, how to get it, and what exactly it means. We work with a lot of third-party vendors, so acquiring a data pipeline to get that data from their database to ours, and we've implemented a data lake. That's been kind of the focus of that. Let's get all that data into our data lake, and just that alone has been an absolute endeavor. We've learned a lot of things about the process because we kind of went into it blind. We've learned that the idea was we want this idea of democratization of data. Everybody can go ahead and get it. If you're an analyst, you can go ahead and go into the data lake and see everything that everybody else can. Well, we found out apparently that's not exactly legal, or the people in charge don't necessarily want that to be allowed. So we have to add in these little extra privacy layers. And when you do all that, here I am, a data scientist. Somehow I've gotten thrown into this whole mix of not really knowing about that whole world. What's supposed to happen when you bring data and just say, okay, we're going to let everybody share it. So that's been a problem. But yeah, we do spend a good time talking to partners, trying to figure out how we're going to get their data. As a data scientist and a part of our team, we focus on automation, and it's not automating when you have to go into a Walmart's retail link portal and pull out data that way. That's not how we want to be doing business.
And that premise on data integration and looking in areas where historically you wouldn't necessarily have looked to find insights, I think is really interesting. There are two use cases that come to mind. One was for a large beverage manufacturer who was essentially looking to see how they did SKU rationalization, and they have a core sort of portfolio of probably 7 to 10 beverages that are 90% of their business. And then above and beyond that, they've got several hundred that are almost seen as kind of innovation brands. And how do they use those innovation brands to continue to refresh their position with their clients, but also B, ensure that their investments in those innovation brands are actually sustainable. And so we help them look at social data to say, what flavors are trending, what flavors can you start to roll in, but equally, which of your products have a really short shelf life, and maybe which should you look to retire before you've even gotten to market. There was another one which was for, one of the world's largest retailers, no surprise. And they were trying to figure out in a certain market how essentially they cater to their target demographic, which in that market was the sort of the college campus market. And they recognized that on certain days they had a correlation between bananas and Gatorade. And they couldn't figure out this correlation. So we started to do some social media analytics. We figured out that this was supposedly a great hangover cure. So on game days, everyone would go out and get trashed and then go and clear out the store of bananas and Gatorade. So what did we do with that information? We started to do, we started to do palletizing of bananas and Gatorades. They then drop pallets straight into the store with everything they need for people having fun on game day.
Just to keep that going, is there any sort of predictive analytics that you guys can share with us, or any projects you guys are working on?
Yeah, there was like in that same vein of like how do you keep going after the pursuit of more perfect data? Like there's a handful of projects we have where the way we're using ML and AI is to actually get better data or get better insights into the data that we have. So, as a retailer, I'm sure many of you know that one of your core metrics are the in-stocks that you have at your store. And through some digging around, we realized that that is not actually what is driving sales and customer engagement, is being in stock at the store. It's it being in stock and on the shelf at the store. And so there was a pretty successful engagement we have using ML and AI where we were predicting when we were saying, our systems were saying that we're in stock, are we actually on the shelf? And so there was a gap between what we thought we knew as a supply chain, as people making decisions in the supply chain, and what the customer was experiencing in our store. And so being able to drive a model that would be able to tell us when something we thought was in stock was actually not on the shelf. Then we had a mechanism to go drive action in our stores with our associates to go check, see if that was the case, stock it down, or make an adjustment in our system to say, hey, no, we're actually out of stock and you think you're in stock.
Yeah, and when it comes to forecasting as well, we when we first showed up, a lot of the models for forecasting demand were based on, how much, where do we think that demand currently is for this particular item. We weren't looking necessarily at specific customers. Okay, we just shipped you guys pallets and pallets of Gatorade. Maybe you're overstocked on that. Our models originally were not kind of taking that into account, and so that's kind of something that we've had to think about is, how do we make this customer specific for every single demand forecasting model that we build.
Have you guys started looking at how to augment external data sources and how that can also play a factor, weather patterns, political instability, and how it affects the overall supply chain of your goods?
From an AI perspective, we haven't done so much in that. We are working with a third-party vendor that is providing weather data, kind of unexpected event data, and that kind of moves down to the analyst level and to the planners. For the most part, though, we have not instituted anything, AI specific at the company level or within our team for that type of work. I imagine the third-party vendor, though, is kind of using AI on their own to figure out, what's relevant, weather or other unexpected event related for every single company and how that affects them. But us personally, no, we've done that external.
Yep.
We pushed that out.
So IBM bought the Weather Channel, and we now have the world's most accurate weather forecast globally. And many of our clients do use that to help them with predictive analytics and help them figure out, how they adapt to weather. And we all know in this world, it's very meaningful. A great example is North Face. If you go onto the North Face site, you can interact with a chatbot there, and you can ask or suggest to the chatbot, I'm going hiking in, the Rocky Mountains in February. What should I wear? And the chatbot will look at long-range or short-range weather forecasts. It'll look through the product catalog offered. It'll look at inventory mapping as well, and also some body type analysis if it has that data on you from your past history, and then suggest what products should be of interest for you. Many other clients as well are using that in agribusiness, in production. A very large food producer we work with is actually doing that for raw materials handling and looking at scheduling and optimizing their labor footprint based on incoming weather around that space.
Yeah, weather is hugely impactful for Home Depot's business, and so there's a couple ways that we're using kind of this external data. One is just in our raw demand planning, so it's hugely impactful in terms of is a season breaking early, is it breaking late? If you have extended periods of cold or rainy weather, it's going to depress home improvement projects in that area, and so incorporating that into our raw demand, like the foundational demand planning in our supply chain, has been a big success story. Apart from that, another interesting area is in emergency response. So Home Depot takes very seriously its role in disaster response and recovery in terms of how we have product, generators, wood, for cases like hurricanes, and making sure that we always have enough material and supplies in locations that are going to be hit or are recovering from a hit. And using and incorporating kind of the response to those weather events has been a big help in how we plan, and then moving in the future toward being able to use that in real time to change how we actually are responding to events, I think is a big area for us.
And I think that's actually one area which we can all get quite passionate about. You know, when you're helping your customers, when you're helping your associates to get through these events that impact, you know, both your business but also your personal lives, that you kind of feel like you're doing some good there. We ran a program for a large southern grocery business. And they were looking to, as you say, work through weather events, hurricanes, et cetera, that come through, and actually work with their client base. They had over 1 million active users of their app. And they wanted to essentially do push notifications out to their customers to say, you know, weather's coming in 3 days. We've still got a bountiful supply of batteries and water and, you know, cans of beans, whatever else is needed. So they were matching inventory and inventory forecast and shipping information and along with the weather, and then doing push notifications. So, and it was great. The impact of that was really helping their consumers essentially be much more engaged, but also get what they needed in times of trouble. And there was a less serious but maybe funny story that I'll share with one of the hair care brands, Wella, where they really wanted to help impact their sort of target demographic, which, you know, was a woman in a certain sort of age range, and help her figure out when she was going to have a bad hair day, because of course humidity spikes and women's hair increases, as does mine. So it was essentially a push to say, you know, go and buy more conditioner, go and buy more products that will help you manage your bad hair day. So 2 or 3 days before the humidity spike, they'd do this push and they'd see the correlating impact in baskets. It was quite surprising.
So in those two cases, you actually created the demand that then you needed to make sure you were able to supply for it. So was that data then shared within the supply chain to ensure that you would have enough on the shelves of these stores?
So that's a really good point you raise. Yeah, the maturity around your kind of integrated business planning profile, and how far, especially as a CPG company, do you share that data down into your retailers? And I think if you can, you know, if you're, as you say, if you're creating the demand, you want to be able to push that down into your retail base so that you can execute on that. And certainly in that case, in P&G, they do a great job of doing that work. But yeah, some people, of course, aren't quite as mature.
I'm changing topics slightly. So we're talking about a lot of use cases, like within the supply chain, some neat opportunities to create part of the demand with customer touch points. When you start some of these projects, how easy is it, and how are you measuring ROI on some of these?
Yeah, so my team, we have a pretty cool approach to this. We have basically 2 metrics that we're using to determine if we're succeeding. It's dollars saved and hours saved. You know, we're supply chain, so it's always going to be on the save side rather than the revenue generation side. But it's a pretty cool way to measure our team. We actually have, there's another team within our space that actually goes out and they kind of, I don't exactly know how they do it, how they come up with the measurements, but they do kind of measure what they think our cost savings were that our team, you know, did over the course of the year, and how that gets allocated to different teams. So it's actually a pretty interesting approach. And so yeah, dollars saved and hours saved, as those are the 2 key metrics for my team.
Yeah, we also track dollars saved and hours saved. I think a key thing that we do is we are always doing test and control pilots. So if we have some process and it might be a little ambiguous on how to measure the benefit exactly, then we will take a handful of stores, run whatever new process or algorithm that we're trying to pilot, and we'll keep a set of control stores, and we'll measure the difference between the 2. And it really helps to kind of nail down those 2 metrics that really drive how successful the group is.
And a couple of different ways we've been looking at things recently with some larger clients in the CPG space, in travel and transport space. They've essentially said, how can we create more of a roadmap of execution programs using AI and ML, a bit like what you were discussing, and then put a framework around it that allows us to have a rapid innovation cycle, you know, that kind of fail fast, fail cheap approach, and then a maturity curve on top of that that says we're now going to take this to the next level of POC and then actually into production. I suppose what you might call a phase gate approach in that approach. So there's several KPIs we're monitoring that to try and help through that process. But certainly we've now gone away from true cost savings and actually gone into how can we impact your bottom line. And I gave you the example of the QSR company that announced yesterday that 30% increase. I mean, that's phenomenal. But we've got other clients out there as well, a major beauty brand on the West Coast, a large retail company. And they're no longer talking about supply chain, they talk about the delight chain. Because they recognize that the last person in their D2C model that actually touches a product before it's shipped out to the consumer is the fulfillment assistant. So the supply chain leader there sat down with me and talked about how do I instill the same level of customer service into my fulfillment execution picker that I would into my store associate. And that's a really different dynamic. I don't think that conversation was happening just a couple of years ago.
I was just to add one more thing. Another part about it, what we do is every tool we build, it has to be able to be tracked in terms of usage metrics. So it's very important. That goes up to, not quite sure what level, but my boss and her boss, they're all looking at these metrics to see how much is the business using it. Because if for some reason we build a product and no one's using it, they're cutting it. That's it, and they're moving on to the next thing because they take these metrics very seriously.
Matt and Dave, you both mentioned it, and this is inherent in the supply chain. Most companies look at it as how can we cut costs? It's not, as a good point, not revenue generating. Yeah. Do you think that could be a reason why less money is being invested across the board? I'm not saying necessarily your companies, but I mean just in general, any article you read, it's saying that the transportation logistics industry is behind as far as investment in AI. Do you see that that's why, or do you have another theory maybe?
I have no theory, so I'm not going to answer that one.
I mean, it's interesting. Cost is it's a big part. We're all in supply chain, so we deal with it daily. It goes straight to the bottom line. I would say it's not the only thing that we touch, though. So there are a lot of projects, especially around our customer delivery and our online presence, where a lot of what we do could help recapture lost sales due to things like out of stock. So it's not the only thing that we're focused on. But the fact that it drops straight to the bottom line is definitely a big piece of it.
And I refer to this I'm sorry.
Oh, just jump in.
Yeah, I was just curious. So I mean, we're talking about cutting costs as one way of measuring the value that we're bringing from a supply chain perspective. But can't we also look at an indirect measurement of the value that supply chain brings if we can get the goods quicker to our consumers, because consumers want to have their goods quick, and is that something that you guys are also looking at? Because that would indirectly increase revenue, right?
Yeah, and I would say kind of a way it indirectly does is one of our customers, because of the work we had been doing, especially within the data science sphere, and we were showcasing some of this work to them, and explaining to them, these are the types of things we're doing to try and ensure that our shipments are arriving on time and in full to your DCs. They went ahead and they actually reduced some of the fines that we normally would get incurred on us if a shipment is late, you're going to incur a fine. And so they kind of went ahead and reduced that for us a bit, and kind of changed up a little bit of the structure for us because we had showcased some of the work we're doing to make sure that we are doing our best to get those on time. So you're right, there's an indirect kind of revenue, cost savings generation, revenue generation, whatever you want to say, that doesn't necessarily come through the data there.
It's a mind shift change too. Sometimes you have to make sure you sell it to the customer and internally to make sure they don't only look at it as a cost saving function. Saif, were you going to go into?
I was going to talk about this concept of the corporate spotlight. So the corporate spotlight shines across your business and finds those cobwebs that you thought you cleared away, and you got to go and focus on those things. And 7 to 10 years ago, at least what I saw in my customer base was that they were really shining on customer intimacy, you might call it. Customer 360, whatever the tagline is, but that was really where a lot of dollars were being spent. 5 years or so ago, it shifted into marketing. So all the CMOs all of a sudden got huge budget increases, and they were pressing all of their experience and pushing out all of their their interactions with commerce and. And I think probably recently, 18, 24 months ago, that's now pivoted into supply chain. Because, of course, what ultimately has happened is that corporations have said, we've invested all this money in our execution capability, which is great, that's done. Now we've got it into marketing, so we've built the demand, but now we've recognized that our ability to actually execute on that demand is limited, and that can be limited in many different ways. So I think many of my clients, at least, are recognizing now that they have to go and reinvest and really change the way they are operating in supply chain, and hence, I don't necessarily see the lack of investment.
Yeah, in the for a lot of retailers, the brand promise that you make to customers is paramount, and so you're never going to run the newspaper, the model where it says what is my cost of fulfilling this demand versus the actual margin gain I get from it. You're going to do what's best for your customers, and then from there we're going to figure out how to do that at the lowest cost. Is kind of the mindset that we have at Home Depot.
I have a question about this in the same vein as you just posed, but I think it's a larger question where you're thinking about dollars saved and hours saved, but there are ecosystems where you will find that a certain action taken in supply chain will have spillover effects which are even larger than looking at myopically within that supply chain ecosystem. And by that I mean, for example, if you're sending shipments to your customers faster, they may end up becoming stickier and their LTV may increase, for example. So how do you guys think about assessing spillover effect and assessing this as an overall universe as opposed to a myopic ecosystem?
That's above my pay grade. So
It's really interesting because the two worlds that kind of I live in are the online and the store world. In the store world, like I said, our number one promise is making sure it's in stock for our customer. So from that perspective, there's relatively little, like the difference between being 99.5% in stock and 99.7% in stock isn't necessarily going to have that kind of spillover effect that you're talking about. It's a big difference in online when we can say, if we can say that our promise to our customers to get it to you in 2 days versus 5 days, and we can actually deliver on that, then it is definitely has those effects, and we are working on models to be able to quantify that. So it's a good point.
And I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think many of our mature customers are really saying, how do I execute IBP? And how do I find upstream and downstream effects? And how do I capitalize on those? A great example, I'm sure many of you read about blockchain. You understand the concept of what blockchain is these days. Many of my clients who are working in food trust and are actually seeing the orchestrated value of that. I mean, Carrefour came out just 2 weeks ago in a press release with Reuters, talked about essentially how they're pushing their poultry division, and they're doing a huge amount of work at the top end of the supply chain, all for the effect that they can actually expose provenance data to the consumer. And they're using a whole host of AI to drive that in action. But essentially what is becoming a small effect at the top end of the supply chain, the production end, is rippling the whole way down and increasing their whatever value you want to derive to that.
Just stay on that same topic a little bit. There's two different ways you can optimize within the supply chain. You can either do automation. We've heard about robotics and different vision, Google Vision or Vision to identify maybe damaged packages. There's also AI within just the supply chain, which is a lot of what we talked about. Just how to optimize it and improve efficiency. What do each of you see as kind of what's going to be the biggest driver in the coming years? Automation versus an AI within the supply chain.
We actually have a framework in how we think about automation versus ML and AI, in that they're very complementary and cyclical. So one of the biggest benefits you get in AI is having that automated feedback loop, and the faster you can get feedback to an action that you're taking or that your algorithm is recommending, the better that algorithm is going to be and the faster it's going to improve over time. And so we really, when we're evaluating projects, we're looking at the overall value it's going to bring and also how ready is it for an ML AI solution. And sometimes that means first we need to clean this up, we need to go automate, we need to make that feedback loop faster so that it can actually support a robust ML AI algorithm. And so that's it. From our end, that's kind of a very complementary and cyclical process.
I mean, what I would say for us, I mean, when we talk about AI in terms of our team, we're talking about automating the full process, automating, not necessarily robotics, in the factories. We're talking about, in terms of data, how we're going to automate this particular process of maybe order management, something like that. One of the biggest, I think. Professor Arun, yesterday, he made a good point about how AI is complementary to the human. And the problem that we are often running into is we'll build a product and very quickly that product will break down because things have changed. And so you need that human kind of back and forth, to help parameterize the changes that are occurring with that particular model, for instance. So that's kind of the way I see it, that it's always kind of a dual, working at the side by side.
And for me, AI is a component of an overall solution. It's not necessarily the answer. It's a bit like having, the engine of a car. If you don't have the wheels and the chassis and the other parts as well, the car doesn't drive. So in my mind, the kind of way we're pressing towards, at least, is the infusion of AI twinned with some IoT, and that can be data sensors, weather sensors, temperature, whatever you want to go and whatever data you want to bring into your organization, twinned with an execution layer. And if you can do that in a really effective way, we're seeing clients essentially sense demand, sense input into their business, do that in a very optimized fashion, taking out a lot of the human interface, and then execute on that demand in essentially a lights-out planning type approach. And that's where 2 or 3 of our, again, very mature clients are pressing towards. How do I remove as much human interface from maybe my production line, from my execution area, from my transport and logistics? How do I bring in repeatable processes? How do I get tribal knowledge from planning and forecasting teams? Bring that into an augmented layer that actually can go and execute repeatably for my business. It's a great place.
Question, actually.
The question, just one, I think it's a great panel. We've got manufacturer, we've got retail, we've got IBM consulting, and we've got DHL managing supply chain. And so when you think about the 4, take the 3 and an idea, but the collaboration that you have with each other in driving efficiency across your business units, so that, and there may not be a direct one there is still between Unilever and Home Depot, but you have it. How are you helping each other throughout the supply chain that you're talking about? And I think DHL has a great place when you're talking about the whole cost value and efficiency. It's a huge equation to drive a better efficiency of whether it's ships, planes, or the last mile. That entire life cycle has value. So I'm interested in how you're just thinking about collaboration.
Well, actually, DHL, they actually manage, I think, 5 of our DCs, actually. So, yeah, there was a relationship there, definitely. Oh, actually, I don't know if you want to speak on that, David.
Moderator, but I don't mind. I'll jump
Yeah.
in. So it really depends on the industry vertical we're dealing with, because depending on who we're working with, they're just willing to invest more money into it. Sometimes, I hate going back to the cost aspect of it, but a lot of times cost becomes one of the biggest players, and it ends up we're competing against FedEx, UPS, and other freight forward companies that it's all about cost. It becomes commoditized. And then when we're trying to bring a lot of these other benefits to it, we still have to pay for our indirect teams. So then it's a matter of, do we lower the price and not offer this, or do we do the best we can to integrate in? So some of the larger companies they are more visionary. They realize this, and they want to bring us in as a big player. So we start sharing our data. We start looking at how we can optimize freight between dense cargo and volumetric cargo and reduce the overall cost on the airplanes to get stuff closer to and faster. So it really just depends on, I have to say, the customer and what they're willing to spend. If you're talking about pharmaceuticals, we have a life sciences division, and the stuff we work on there, we do a lot of cold chain. Because the cargo is so valuable, they're willing to spend the money on IoT. Because losing one shipment is so impactful. Not to say if within retail it's not impactful, but this one shipment could be worth millions and millions of dollars versus a shipment of shirts. So it just becomes those type of industries are willing to spend more with us, and then we can do more. Now what we can start doing is leveraging some of that. Once we it's more mature, leveraging that in with some of the other companies. But we try to share as much information as we can.
And to sort of continue your concept of collaboration, we're seeing people in typically, what you would call vertically integrated markets, reaching across borders and finding mechanisms either to share data or actually share processes and say, how can we collaborate? How can we do more together to either drive cost out, make us more efficient, whatever that end use case may be. Several different businesses I can think of in the agribusiness who are large scale crop producers who are really being much more effective about getting the downstream data, essentially what they know their end consumer is going to want, and sharing that up and down their business model to take cost out for everyone. Yeah, it's becoming very collaborative.
Yeah, and where AI and ML fit into it is just anytime you've got a forecast that you're sharing with a partner company, like the more accurate that is, the faster and more streamlined you can make it. If you're not having to wait until a shipment is confirmed to schedule transportation for that shipment, you can drive days of lead time out of your network, reduce working capital, and so being able to just push forward and really tighten in on your forecast out to your end, sharing that with your partners can make a huge difference.
I'm going to ask one last question, and we'll open it up just to general questions, but just maybe go down the line. What would you say are the 2 to 3 most important aspects of trying to integrate AI, machine learning, analytics, whatever term you want to call it, into the supply chain from your point of view?
I think, a lot of times from a technical team, we don't work with the business enough. We think that we can kind of solve the problem without really, finding out the intricacies that only the business knows. And I think, we've been trying to get a little bit better about hiring maybe somebody a little bit less technical, but maybe somebody who has a little bit of supply chain experience. We talked about how difficult it was to hire data scientists. Maybe we just need, some analysts that, have supply chain experience can bring some of that domain knowledge to the team. Because I think a lot of times we'll build something and figure out, no, what, this is actually doesn't work because of X, Y, Z reason that, a lot of people in supply chain would have immediately told us.
I really agree with what your point. The human sort of touch points, the human interaction, I think is really key, and we're seeing that as well. There's another point which I think is more of a kind of a legacy view, which is historically everything in supply chain was batch driven. Everything was coming through 24, maybe even longer cycles. 24 hours doesn't work anymore. We're too fast for that now. So how do you take, your batch driven business and make it real time or near real time? And that, I think there's an art to that level of integration, an art to that level of data abstraction, and it requires some careful thought. I think people are trying to work through that right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the biggest, I think, for us at Home Depot is a very large company, and there's many aspects of the supply chain. The team that we work with can't possibly know everything and all the different important decisions being made across the entire supply chain. And so one of the most important things for us is being able to source, like, where are the opportunities that we don't know about. Going to our operational partners and teaching them the right questions to ask themselves about their processes, about the decisions they're making, thinking about how it affects the bottom line and how we could help them make their jobs better, easier, more effective, make them more effective. That's really been key. And so having a framework that kind of ties that all together from our SVP, from our COO, all the way down to the planners that are planning the transportation, our inventory, our distribution, and just getting everyone on the same page and how they think about the decisions that are being made and where these types of solutions could help them has been really key.
I'll just add mine just to the end. One question I always try to ask when we're going to go into any sort of project, we're creating a new dashboard or looking at applying AI, I'd stop, and it's really hard because we always want to create dashboards, and I always say, well, why? What decision is going to be made with this? Like, it's great, we're going to have this nice fancy dashboard, but what will it drive? What decision will it drive? And asking that, a lot of times we'll step back and say, well, it'll look nice, but I don't think it's actually going to drive any specific decision, so then why are we doing it? So, but it's sometimes harder when you're saying that upwards, where top management want a nice dashboard and they think it's going to solve everything. So it's just an issue that I encounter sometimes. But with that, we have about 12 minutes left. We did that intentionally to kind of give you guys some questions. So please.
Hi there, and thanks for being here. Is this thing on? We are speaking about supply chain, and IBM, you brought up your relationship with Weather Channel. And of course, Weather Channel has a relationship with Weather Underground, and all these scientists are working on weather, and Matson and his team of scientists. Is IBM looking at how AI can be applied on the weather side to help enhance what you're trying to do with supply chain to, try to further enhance predictability, like what's the weather going to be and transportation considerations and things of that nature? Just kind of curious about what that relationship might be like.
At a macro level, yes. We're using short and long range weather patterns essentially to help our clients do more, operate better, operate faster, in some cases operate cheaper. I think, as we suggested, a lot of the weather patterns do influence our business. They implement demand. They hit our demand spikes. They hit our demand cycles. So yeah, many of our clients are really leaning into that to say, how can we be more effective, more robust, more granular in our weather patterns? And we're seeing 3 or 4 really key areas there. So as I mentioned, the agronomic sector is huge right now. You can imagine why. There's no surprise there. Retail, of course, is very, very significant. But funnily enough, areas like industrial, industrial is really impacted by weather, especially when you get into producing jets, for example. They really have to know how they're going to do logistics and shipping of these large, wide-bodied jets and move those through areas that can be really impacted by big weather events. So the short answer is yes. There's a much longer answer to that as well, but yeah.
I'll add one thing. We're not so much we deal with weather as well, but we're also looking at news articles and doing NLP processing to determine is there political instability in certain ports, so that we can start giving customers the option. Like, there's a chance that if you're sending to this specific port, it could get delayed. There could be an issue. You might want to look at potentially, and we're not making the decision for them yet, this is just more of the alerts, but hey, you might want to look at sourcing that from somewhere else. If it's going to disrupt your overall supply chain, at least it gives them the awareness and they can make decisions.
Yeah.
So our biggest challenge is our legacy data streams. And I was wondering if there are any technologies or techniques that y'all have used very successfully to maintain and organize and sort of spread that information about your data throughout your enterprise. If that makes sense.
Yeah, like a data catalog or something of that nature. Data, yeah. So that we have like a social media thing within the company that you can post, data science to all the data science teams across the entire globe that work for Unilever. And so I posted that question one day. I said, hey, what are you guys using for data catalog? And 3 days went by and not a single person, and there's 300 people in this group, not a single person answered that question. Finally, someone jumped in and said, hey, I think that there's a vendor coming in that's going to be doing something about that. So I have looked into it, and actually it turns out, yes, there is a vendor that's going to come in and supposedly kind of manage that. They're managing it a little bit more from the perspective of we have a data lake, and there's still a lot of process right now of moving that data into our data lake and all the pipelines that are operating that. So it'll be more in the sense of the data lake will have a data catalog or dictionary of some type. However, when you talk about the legacy systems, I mean, you got to just know the right people, I suppose, and hope they don't quit, because it's you're 100% right. A lot of times I'm just scrambling on the phone trying to find somebody who knows what the heck this column and this and A, B, and C, what those refer to on this particular column of data.
People hugely underestimate that complexity. And they have this panacea of data lake. Oh, data lake will solve all of that. No, rubbish. All that does is it brings it together, but my God, have you got a huge amount of work to get there. And the number of clients that I work with on a day in, day out who are pretty far down the road with their data lake ambitions on whatever platform you want to choose. And roughly they're all as good as each other. But it's how have you actually taken them and implemented them? How have you got some kind of consistency in the data that you ETL into that platform? And then how do you abstract that? And is there an easy answer? No.
A surprising source of help in this for us at Home Depot has been Slack. So we have thousands of analysts and everyone working on all this different data. And so when someone has a question, you go ask it in Slack, someone can answer. You can also search Slack history. A lot of times if I have a question about a column, I just type the column name into Slack and I get a bunch of different posts, and a lot of times my question is answered, and if not, it's normally a pretty quick turnaround on figuring out who owns it and how to go through there. So that's been a huge resource for us.
Actually, that's actually really interesting. We've kind of experimented with Slack with some of our consultants, but we're not using it ourselves. But what you just said right there, I mean, that's a really, really good method, I feel like.
Yeah, big Slack fan.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to use Confluence more, but it's actually getting the people to actually get the data and put it in organized fashion.
Yeah.
Confluence is a great tool. Jira is a great tool. I mean, they're all, I almost say it doesn't matter what tool you choose, as long as you're using it, because that's, again, half the battle. People go to implement this tool, and no one really adopts it, and, So there's lots and lots of good tools out there.
Yeah. But again, sorry, but there's no easy answer to your question about
I would say credit to Home Depot. We recently just moved our whole enterprise data warehouse to the cloud. So I would say 90% of our data is centrally located and available to most people, which has been great. So it's more, our problems are more on figuring out how to use the data that's available.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I have a question on the supply chain side. You've spoken at length about supply chain upstream and downstream. You've spoken about planning, order management, operations, logistics, part of it. The last part, which I haven't heard, or it's probably not the right panel here, but I'll still go ahead and ask you, what are you seeing, or are you seeing any scope for machine learning, AI, robotics, RPA, any of these analytical tools in the last part of accounts receivables in the F&A space? Because they get the brunt of the bad processes or bad habits up and upstream, and they have to deal with it. And I kind of ask this because that's the topic close to my heart, to my So any insights into either your company looking into that, or your own thoughts on where would that be in that particular subdomain? Thank you.
So we're still a little bit early on in that journey, attacking those types of problems, but we are starting to do it. We have a project right now that I've been working on where we receive data. We're trying to verify. We're getting charged back. We're getting a lot of chargebacks. We're getting charged for we have a 2-hour window to load our truck, and we didn't load that truck in that 2-hour window, so the carrier can go ahead and charge us for that. So what we've been doing is we've been going through very large data sets to be trying to understand the data. And in terms of the only way that we really use AI or machine learning in this sense is, it's still a rule-based problem. We can look through our GPS pings to figure out where the truck was. Was this fine that that we didn't the fine that we got from them, was that legitimate or not? But a lot of times the data is missing, or you'll have partial data. You'll have some data that tells you what the truck number, the trailer, or the tractor number of the truck, but it won't tell you the actual shipment number. And so what we actually are using is machine learning to go ahead and impute that data, figure out what is the shipment number that was missing, and maybe we're missing a 6-hour chunk of data. So if we're missing that chunk, can we figure out what happened in between there, and try and kind of connect the dots, because so it becomes more than just a rule-based problem of figuring out where was the truck when it was set, was the carrier actually late, or was it on time, or whatever, and then using machine learning to fill in the holes.
Yeah, it's when we first did our sourcing of ideas across all our operational partners for what could be good machine learning AI initiatives. It was an area that kind of popped as there were a bunch of use cases where if you could accurately forecast receipts into DC, receipts into store, receipts at any given location, you could help F&A, you could help inventory planning, you could help transportation planning by knowing when you were gonna be over on your capacity that you'd secured for a given lane. You could help labor planning at stores in DC. So it's one of the areas that we've tackled first with ML and AI is how can we get a robust 1, 3, 5, 10-week forecast for receipts at a given location. And it's something we're in the middle of pursuing right now.
And great area for cost takeout. So again, backwards looking, people did a lot of outsourcing, tried to push this work off to far-flung corners of the world, and that really drove cost out. I think what many clients are now doing is say, how do I bring in cognitive processing into this effect? How do I bring in, as you say, AI, ML, chatbots, execution arms, RPA, great story. And we're seeing many clients out there who are driving hard. A recent study we did actually on one of the clients in this room, helping them figure out how they go from just essentially offshoring their FA business and bringing that into a true AI-enabled F&A space. Suggested that, I'm making these numbers up, so don't quote me, but maybe it was $5 or $6 per each invoice that they run. And if you were using a smart contract-based approach, you could get it down to about $1.60. It was that level of degradation of cost. So there's still a huge efficiency curve to go, I think, in that world as people bring in more and more technology.
And we're not actually, we're doing some of it. We're looking at chatbots, but not as much as we should. It is an area, I mean, having a backlog of AR is a huge issue. And we monitor it, but we're not currently doing anything with AI, machine learning that I'm aware of. Any other questions?
Did you ever run into a problem where, say, one part of the company was using a particular data system as its single source of truth, and another part of the company was using a different data system as a single shard of truth? And how do you deal with those issues?
Yeah, literally every day.
Yes.
What we've decided is, depending on what the project is, that's where we're going to decide what the ultimate, the truth is, because it really just depends on. For us, we do it based on projects. What's the worst case if it's all it's project based. Sorry, that's all I'm trying to say. Basically, we don't just pick one and just go with that. Yeah.
The receipts forecasting thing I just talked about was one area. I mean, it was something that different areas of the company were all making up their own forecasts and planning off of that. And so there was a lot of benefit in just using ML/AI to get better at that, but also having it centralized and having one plan so that your inventory and in finance and your transportation planning are all based off the same thing. There's huge benefit in that as well.
Every day, as you say, yeah. There's always someone, it's human nature is to build your fiefdom. This is my world, this is how I operate. If someone wants to come into my world, you live by my rules. And of course, when you've got two warring parties, I suppose that's part of the art, isn't it? Making sure that you find the right approach through. And so it is a subtlety I think you've got to work through. There's no magic answer, but yeah, it's common.
All right, well, let's thank our panelists for this awesome information.